We're honored today to hear from Hunter Rawlings, who is the president of the American Association of Universities, about the role of research universities and the future of public higher education. These subjects address the essence of what the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill is and how its future will be shaped. How we at Carolina approach the issues of college access and completion, undergraduate education, how research can help solve the world's problems, and influence the future of American public higher education. As the nation's first public university, we have a responsibility and an opportunity to imagine and implement creative ways to ensure that the mission of this unique kind of institution continues to address society's greatest questions. It has always been part of our heritage to innovate and lead. We pioneered the idea of public higher education in the 1790s when the country was brand new. The modern research university got its start in the Moral Acts, and now I need my glasses to read the numbers, of 1862 and 1890, but in the 1920s, it was UNC that led Southern universities in developing a research enterprise and in defending the critical idea of academic freedom. UNC's regional leadership was acknowledged by its inclusion as a member of the AAU in 1922, one of the first Southern universities to be invited. In the 1980s, Carolina's partnerships with nearby universities and through the Research Triangle Park brought a new level of public and private support to UNC, helping to build world-class programs in medicine, public health, business, and more. Following in this great Carolina tradition, we are engaging in this conversation about the future of the public research university. It is very much about Carolina and also about North Carolina, the nation, and the world. Hunter Rawlings is one of American higher education's most articulate spokespersons. Before becoming AAU president, he was president of the University of Iowa and Cornell University. He is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and holds degrees in classics from Haverford and from Princeton. Before I bring Hunter on, I just want to remind the audience that the annual Lambeth Lecture in Public Policy will be here in this same room this evening. This year's speaker is Alice Rivlin, who will be speaking about healthcare reform, another interesting and important topic that touches on Carolina in a huge way. That'll be a lively evening as well, and so I hope you'll be here with me. Hunter will talk for 25 or 30 minutes, and then we will take questions from the audience. So let's give a warm Carolina welcome to Hunter Rawlings.
Thank you very much, Holden, for that nice introduction. It's great to be back in Carolina, even if I am a Virginian. And on that note, I want to emphasize something that my wife insists that I emphasize, but I would do it on my own. Elizabeth has 2 degrees from Chapel Hill in French, and she's exceedingly proud of those degrees. So I've said it now. I'll say it again if need be. But she really did love it here. She started at Greensboro because in those days women needed to start at Greensboro, but that's okay because she couldn't go to the University of Virginia in those days at any stage. Our kids still have a hard time believing that their mother couldn't go to the University of Virginia, but that's the way it was. So I'd like to thank Holden for inviting me here, and I'd also like to thank your board. I had the pleasure of spending 3 hours, roughly, with your board last night, and I want to underline something. This is a really, really good board. And I say that with a certain passion because these days we need great boards at public universities for obvious reasons. You have one. You really do have one. And I'm not saying that to make anybody feel good. I really mean it. It's unusual in this day and age to have a board that is so knowledgeable, so loyal, understands the basic purposes and values of the university so well, and cares as much with as much passion as this board has. So you're lucky, and I hope you recognize that and that will continue to be a big asset, and I'm sure it will at this time in the history of Chapel Hill. So I was named president of AAU in March of last year, 2011. I was safely teaching classics at Cornell. I don't know why I took this job, because teaching classics at a research university is the ultimate pleasure, in my opinion, and I derived enormous pleasure out of doing that and doing a little bit of my own work, though it's hard to do that after you've been in administration for a lot of years. But I tried to be a contributor in that way as well. I wrote a couple of articles, very proud of those articles, but that's not the most important thing. It was the chance to teach students again, which I did for 8 years full-time before taking this job in Washington. AAU has 35 public members among its 61 total members, 59 U.S., 2 Canadian. So a little more than half of our universities are public universities. Since that day in March, when I was named president of AAU, 13 presidents at those 35 public universities have left their positions. 13 in 18 months. Most of them prematurely. Some of them fired, some of them resigned under pressure. So, of course, my first question is this my fault? I mean, I've been on the job now for 18 months and we've lost 13 presidents. You do have to wonder. But I don't think I have that sort of power. You have to ask, what is going on? That there is so much turnover, so much instability, which is not the case at our private universities. Well, there's no one cause, but let me just list 5 that I consider to be prominent causes of this turnover. First, financial pressures at the state level that we're all familiar with. Most state budgets are in trouble. They've been in trouble now for 4, 5, 6 years. States are disinvesting in higher education. Last year, 46 states cut higher education from the general fund budget, reduced it, many for the 4th or 5th year in a row. So this is not a 1-year, 2-year problem now. This is an ongoing trend that's very bad. Second major issue or cause, ideological pressures. Notice I don't say political pressures, ideological pressures. There are state leaders now in this country who do not believe in public support for public higher education. They don't believe in it fundamentally. It's very difficult to say that, but it is true, and you can see plenty of evidence for that. And with that lack of support goes, in some cases, open hostility towards university leadership. We have that today in Texas, where the governor is in an ongoing battle with the president of the University of Texas at Austin, Bill Powers. And every week there are more articles in the Texas press about how long President Powers is going to make it as president. So this is not some quiet little secret. This is a public controversy. It goes on because the governor has a view on how higher education should be conducted. A degree for a Texas resident should cost $10,000. That's 4 years. It should cost $10,000, and it should lead to a job right away. And that's the way of looking at the state's flagship university. This kind of thinking is also prevalent now in Florida, in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, and it is spreading. The third cause I call corporatization of the university. The corporatization of the university comes when governing boards insist on new financial models, new sources of revenue, running the operation like a business, preparing students for vocation, developing online education, any sources of revenue that will work, and disruptions that will somehow create some huge change in the way universities conduct their business. The cases I would cite for this are University of Virginia, University of Colorado. And you're all familiar with the events this past summer at the University of Virginia. I've been especially close to those events. I'm sure you know a lot about those. But I call that essentially the corporatization approach to running a university. The fourth cause is systems versus flagships. And this is prevalent in several states. The worst cases recently were Wisconsin, Illinois, and Oregon. And in essence, I don't have to explain what this really means. It means basically that in a time of budget stress, systems are all working very hard, all the members to do as well as they can. Flagships feel that they need to be held apart a little bit in order to maintain their quality. The other members of the system don't like that, and so you have a clash, and this cost Biddy Martin her job at University of Wisconsin-Madison. It costs the president at the University of Oregon his job. Illinois has been in tremendous turmoil for years now over this issue, system versus flagship. And then the final cause I'll name is one familiar to you, intercollegiate athletics, which is a serious public issue at a number of places, but clearly here at Chapel Hill, and Penn State is clearly a very unfortunate example of that. So for these 5 reasons, and others I'm sure, we're seeing unprecedented turnover in public presidents and chancellors. Meanwhile, private universities are thriving again. They took their hits back in 2008 and 2009 with the fall of their endowments, but those endowments have, for the most part, recovered now, more or less to where they were before. Faculty salaries are going up at private universities every single year. New programs are being created, and in fact, private universities are investing in big new programs in this country and abroad that carry their brand all around the world. NYU, I like to joke with John Sexton, the president of NYU, that he'll soon be announcing that he's opening a new campus on the moon, because he's opened one in just about every country in this world, and NYU has a very aggressive approach towards global education, and they put their money where their mouth is. They're doing it. Yale is opening a new campus in Singapore for liberal arts education on the American model. This is an amazing thing when you consider the way Singapore was just 10 years ago, when its universities were essentially British universities, and today they want to be American universities, and so Yale is there with a whole new college. Stanford is investing all over the place. My former institution, Cornell, just won the competition for a big new tech campus in Manhattan. This is a very big deal for a university that's located in Ithaca, New York, as we'd like to say, centrally isolated Ithaca. Now, not only will the medical college be in Manhattan, which it's always been, or almost always been, but a big new tech campus supported by the mayor of New York City and promoted as a big new venture for the city. So the gap between publics and privates is growing. It's a very unfortunate gap. We at AAU take it very seriously because we're the only higher ed association that has many public members and private members. We don't represent just the privates or just the publics. We represent the great research universities in this country, public and private, and we are very concerned about this gap. It creates all kinds of problems. Poaching of faculty is obvious, but there are many other problems as well, and we think that the great glory of the American system of higher education, the thing that makes it the best in the world, is its diversity, the fact that we have great private universities and great public universities. So whether it's University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, or Berkeley, or Michigan, or Virginia, these are great universities, and now they're disadvantaged in comparison with their private counterparts. So we see this in faculty salaries. We see it in length of tenure of presidents and chancellors. Rick Levin just announced a couple weeks ago that he's stepping down at Yale. 20 years as president. Shirley Tillman just announced last week she's stepping down at the end of this year at Princeton. 12 years as president. This enables stability, long-term planning, new initiatives that can be seen through to completion, all the advantages you get. Now, of course, there are limits to these things. Some would say 20 years is a very long time. Others would say 12 years is a very long time. It's always hard to hit exactly the right period, but clearly private university presidencies are not turning over at anywhere near the rate of publics. So the fundamental problem to me, the one that I worry the most about and go around the country trying to talk about, is that on a national basis, we can unfortunately, I think, conclude that the old public compact we had in this country is broken. When I was a kid growing up in Virginia in the 1950s, higher education was a democratic value. It was a public good. And there was broad assent to that proposition. We went to college to become educated, to use an old-fashioned word. That's what college was for. And that meant broadly educated in history, literature, math, science, the liberal arts. There were two chief purposes, as we understood it, for being educated. First, to become a contributing citizen in a democracy, someone who is well educated enough to help the country make sensible, intelligent decisions of public policy. That's why you went to get an education. The second purpose was to prepare for a lifetime of personal learning and appreciation of general culture. Western culture, of course, it must be said. We were confined in those days to studying Western culture, by and large. But there was an understanding that part of your educational purpose was to prepare yourself for a lifetime of learning and appreciation of the arts, the sciences, culture in general. That's why you went to college. A better job, it was understood, would almost inevitably follow. It wasn't the purpose of higher ed, but it was an assumed benefit based on having a degree. But college, except in certain instances, was not designed to prepare us for specific jobs. Today, much of America instead sees higher education as a utilitarian necessity. Its sole purpose is to train students to get a job. Higher education has therefore become a private interest, not a public good. And as a private interest, it should be paid for by kids and their parents, consumers, to use the term many now use for students going off to college. So as a result, while 25 years ago, nationally speaking, the state paid 2/3 of the student's costs and the student and family paid 1/3, today on average, those ratios are reversed. Now, on average, the student pays 2/3, the state pays 1/3, and the state commitment is dropping every year. In a study that came out just a couple of days ago from the National Science Board, the figures show that in 10 states, per student support fell between 2002 and 2010 at least 30%. Down, down, down goes state support. The faculty, according to this same utilitarian view of the university, which dominates in a lot of our states now and shows signs of spreading to others, has one main purpose. The purpose of the faculty is to teach students stuff that will enable them to get a job right away. Research is of secondary significance, and its chief purpose, according to this utilitarian view, is to spawn economic development. The reason faculty members do research is, according to this view, to spawn economic development. That leaves Greek professors like me a little bit out of the mainstream, to put it somewhat mildly. So this ideology then essentially sees the university as a corporation that needs to be managed by its president like a business, with an emphasis on the bottom line, on revenue enhancement, on productivity gains, cheaper delivery, new technologies, disruptive strategies and products in a fast-paced, competitive environment. Now, I've intentionally painted an extreme picture of this point of view, but I don't think, frankly, that it is inappropriate for a lot of public thinking today. Administrations that do not deliver this kind of innovation will be replaced, apparently without much public notice, much less any consultation. Now, I buy into this way of looking at the change that's taken place. I do think that this is a common view today of higher education in the U.S. But I want to point out a few things on the other side in order to give a little more balanced view. First, we at universities have to admit that tuition has been going up pretty rapidly in the last 15 or 20 years. At least the sticker price has been going up rapidly, even if real net costs have not, owing to financial aid and other means of helping students. This rise in the sticker price adds to the perception that universities are selfish, out of control, and that perception has now reached students and their parents and the general public. We have a hard time defending ourselves these days against tuition increases, which are happening in a lot of places. Secondly, undergraduate education at many, especially large public universities, has suffered from large classes, a certain amount of incoherence in the curriculum that I'll come back to. At some public flagships, AAU schools, students have difficulty getting the courses they need to graduate on time. They have difficulty getting majors they want. They have difficulty getting access to professors they want to see. And completion rates at some of our schools are quite low. There are flagship public universities in this country where the graduation rate after 4 years is about 50%. You do much, much better here at Chapel Hill. But some of our flagships in AAU are performing at the 48, 49, 50% level. That, of course, at a time of rising student debt, creates a lot of criticism that I well understand. And thirdly, I think we need to acknowledge that universities are, in fact, now very large, corporate-like institutions with far-flung, diverse businesses. For example, hospitals and athletic programs. Huge hospitals and huge athletic programs. And auxiliary enterprises such as apparel stores and tech transfer operations that require teams of lawyers and accountants to keep the books. Much of this side of the university is essentially out of the hands of the faculty or only partly under its purview. And as a result, the old shared governance model that we've depended upon, in which faculty and administration and board all share responsibility for the university, has a hard time not looking antiquated in the face of these pressures. And our structures and traditions don't seem to cope very well with the modern university, with all its scale and diversity. In fact, some of these businesses that we are running at our universities create clear, constant conflicts of interest with the academic mission of the place. So these are real problems. This is not someone else manufacturing problems for us or blaming us for things that don't exist. These are real. So what can we do under these circumstances about the real problems and the perceived problems? Well, let me just offer a few thoughts, and these don't have any magic to them. They're just some thoughts that I have on how one can best confront this very difficult period in the history of public higher education in the United States, about which I'm quite concerned, and I grow more concerned all the time. First, I think it's going to take a concerted effort by all parties, all stakeholders, to understand and address these issues, preferably by regular, open, respectful communication and decision-making. Now, that sounds obvious, but I cannot overemphasize the need for transparency and goodwill in interactions among governing boards, presidents, and faculty members in this environment of declining state support and a hostile political climate and a certain loss of public trust. Some recent decisions made by governing boards aren't just questionable, they are, in fact, atrocious. And the process used was atrocious. So we need to repair our processes and make sure that we're acting in good faith in the university's best interest across these different groups. Secondly, boards, and I cannot stress this enough, and fortunately you don't have this problem, but boards need to support their presidents strongly and visibly in the state. Not thwack away at presidents, but support them, at least if they're doing a good job, and to represent the university effectively to state government and to the public. Boards need to get out there and speak and write about these issues in order to counter some of the public pressures and public positions that are being taken. Governors need to be thoughtful, consultative, and less partisan and political in making appointments to governing boards. This is a really important point. I don't think appointments to governing boards should be a spoils system in which you thank major donors and supporters by putting them on these boards. People on governing boards now have a huge responsibility, and it's partly thankless because you don't get paid for this kind of service, you're in the public glare all the time, and you're making decisions that make some people very unhappy. Under those circumstances, you need really good people on boards, and governors need to be much more thoughtful, in my view, in appointing people to their boards. Administrators, presidents, chancellors, provosts, and the like need to lead. Holden's done a great job here of leading, even under difficult circumstances. We need leaders who will lead in higher education, and then define and convey internally and externally a vision of public serving institutions that prize great research and great teaching and learning, not simply for utilitarian purposes, but for their own sake, as well as for the sake of a functioning democracy that requires citizens who can think critically and independently, and who can construct effective arguments and analyze the arguments and claims of others, particularly elected officials. And since large public research universities are now complex, multi-dimensional institutions, presidents and chancellors need to be adept at sorting out the competing demands of diverse constituencies, prioritizing those demands, and frankly, saying no to some of them on a regular basis in order to ensure that academic values remain paramount and privileged. The necessity of saying no to constituencies in this environment, it seems to me, is almost overwhelming. When values are on the line and when pressure is the worst, that's when one has to say no, a lot of the time. It's not much fun, but I think it has to be done. Finally, I think the faculty need to recognize the public pressures now acting upon universities and help the administration respond to those pressures and convey a strong message throughout the state about the importance of research and education. I also hope that faculty members will take steps to improve undergraduate education. This is a particular concern of mine. It's a hobby horse. I really do think that we've got to stay fixated on quality undergraduate education, particularly in the curriculum. I think at many of our universities, the curriculum now has become squishy and incoherent. And we have got to make it, in my view, much more coherent and much more respectful of what students really need today. I taught for the past 8 years at Cornell. We had great students, just as you do here at Chapel Hill. But the idea of assigning a sophomore a 25-page paper when that sophomore can't write a 3-page paper is a really bad idea. But we have faculty members doing it all the time. Students need to learn how to make arguments and assess arguments and read complex prose. I'll get off my stump here any second, but I do feel passionately about this, and I think we really do need to spend a lot of time making sure of what we're doing in that dimension. Now, one of the most important statements about what a liberal education really is, I think, came from Lionel Trilling, the great American critic, professor at Columbia for many, many years. And he talked about something that's especially needed in this age of sound bites and instant, unfiltered information. And that is contemplative experience. And here's how Trilling defined contemplative experience. By contemplative experience, I mean those pursuits in which the faculties, though engaged, are concerned with their own exercise, chiefly. If we abandon the idea of literature as an independent, contemplative experience, as a pleasure, if we continue to make it conform to philosophies of immediate ends, if we continue to do these things, we shall be contributing to the loss of two things of the greatest social value. Of those, one is the possibility which art offers of an experience that is justified in itself, of nearly unconditioned living. Unconditioned living, something we could all use a little more of. The second thing we shall lose is the awareness, it is ultimately practical, which comes only from the single-minded contemplation of works that arise from artists' own contemplation of events and objects. This is an awareness of the qualities of things. I love that. This is the awareness of the qualities of things. In the realm of art, we call these qualities style. In the realm of morals, we call them character. In the realm of politics, we have no name for them, but they are finally important. So where else but at the university can today's students find contemplative experiences like these that Trilling defines? Nowhere else. Nowhere else is there time or attention to contemplative experience. From everything I've seen, Chapel Hill, in spite of setbacks, still suffers less from the problems I've been describing than almost any other public flagship in the United States. And it has a great tradition of liberal arts education and excellence in research. Superb research. The big task now, I think, is to stick to your academic values and keep it that way. And I want to finish by just giving you a very brief anecdote from something I did yesterday afternoon. I got here at about 4 o'clock, and I had a couple hours before meeting with the board and with Holden. So I conducted an experiment, which I like to do when I get to universities and I have a little time. And of course, as a humanist, it's not a scientific experiment. It is not a social science experiment with lots of people being polled. I go to the best place on campus, which is, of course, the old quad, and I find a student to talk with. and I bother that student for about 6 minutes. And yesterday, I did this. And I sat on a bench with a student who is from eastern North Carolina, and I plied her with questions of the following type. What year are you? Freshman. How many big classes do you have? 1. How many small classes do you have? 4. Wow. How is it that you're taking so many small classes at this big public university? She said, because I knew coming here that this university offered small classes, and it made good on the offer. So I'm taking a freshman seminar. I'm taking an English writing class. I'm taking a small discussion class. And I have 1 big lecture class in biology. I said, how are your faculty? She said, they're really good. I said, tell me about that. What makes them good? She said, they allow us to talk. They listen to our arguments. They monitor what we're doing in class. So I'm thinking, Holden put this student here as a setup. So I asked her a couple of more questions. I said, what about the other students here? Are they serious about their education? She said, most of the freshmen I know, she's been here, what, a month? Said, most of the freshmen I know are working hard. And I said, that's good to know, they're working hard. Why are they working hard? She said, because they want to get good grades. I said, why are you working hard? She said, because I really want to learn stuff, so I'm taking intentionally tough classes. And I do have to say, a fair number of my fellow freshmen here are trying to find some easy classes to take. She said, I'm here to try to find hard classes to take. So, having had an incredibly delightful 7-minute talk with this student, I'm here to tell you, in spite of everything I've just said, all is pretty well here. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Hunter. Those remarks couldn't have been more appropriate for all the things that we're working on. I just want to take the privilege of asking the first question. You said things are going pretty well here, and I agree on the fundamental things. And we're fortunate because, compared to some of the ratios that you were talking about, our tuition is still only $7,700 in state. We're still getting 18% of our budget from state appropriations. So how do we couch the argument that you're making in the context that we're still doing well compared to a lot of our peers?
Well, that's a good question, and the fact is you are doing pretty well in respect to many of your peers. First, in the kind of education you're delivering and the opportunity for students to graduate here on time and without a lot of debt, those are good. And you're also doing pretty well, I shouldn't say this very loudly, but you're doing pretty well in terms of state support. I'm sure you don't feel that way because you've been suffering cuts. But compared to many of your peers, you are being supported by the state of North Carolina pretty well because that's been a traditional value in North Carolina. So in that sense, I think Chapel Hill is really doing well. On the other hand, it is true that over the last few years you've suffered cuts. It is true that faculty salaries haven't really kept up with many of the peers, especially the private peers we have. And it is true that there's a growing sense in North Carolina, as there is in some of those other states I mentioned, that the fundamental value of an education here is now being questioned. And so I think this is a time when the leadership at Chapel Hill, the board, needs to be making the strongest possible case for what's different about an education here from an education at schools that are much more vocationally directed. Now, I have nothing against schools that are vocationally directed, and in fact, many of them are doing a great job, and we need those schools to be doing a great job for kids. But that's not your job. And I just think we have to keep talking about that and working on that as hard as we possibly can. And we try at AAU to help our public universities make that case. Frankly, I've also said to private university presidents, you need to get up on the stump and start talking about the value of public universities and how critical it is to the privates that the publics get back on track.
Okay, questions for Hunter? Yeah, Bill. There's a mic coming to you, Bill.
Can you speak about the for-profit colleges that are rising and the impact on schools like UNC?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I think I'll be blunt. As you can tell, I tend to be a little on the candid side. You know, it's a lot easier now that I'm not in Holden's seat. I go back to Washington, D.C. I'm not on a campus, and I can say what I want, but or at least mostly say what I want. Holden and his fellow presidents and chancellors, by the way, are my bosses, so I do have to be a little careful. But Bill, I don't think online universities are doing us much of a favor right now. Most of them have business plans that are based fundamentally on bringing in students with federal money, giving them a not very good education, and then having them default on their debt at a high percentage with no real education to show for it. Now, you can say some schools, some online schools, or some for-profit schools do better than that, and I would acknowledge some do better than that, but a lot of them do not. And let me just give you a couple numbers. The average default rate now across the country for four-year not-for-profit universities is about 4.5%. The default rate at AAU universities is about 2.2%. The default rate at for-profit universities is 15.5%. And most of those kids leave without a degree. So I'm sorry, I just have to say it as it is. In spite of some good work, I'm sure, at some of those institutions, this is a ripoff.
Greg Copenhaver.
So I'm concerned that historically our society provided robust paths to a dignified life that did not involve higher education, but that today those paths have essentially withered and died. And so, you know, following up on your last remarks, should we simply wait for the vocationally oriented institutions to catch up and reinvigorate those paths, or is there something positive that we can do to play a role in that as well?
That's a good and fair question and a difficult one. And I don't have a great answer for you, but I think you're essentially correct in saying that it's very difficult now for those who do not get a chance to get a good college education, because we know what's happened to the jobs for such non-college educated people. And I'm afraid that many of those jobs now are gone forever. They're not gone for the 3 years or 4 years we're talking about now. And obviously national leaders don't want to talk about this much, but it appears, and I'm no economist, but it appears from what I read that most of those jobs, or many of those jobs, are gone for good. So this means it's not surprising that most kids and their families want to get a college education today. They feel they have to, given the conditions. And let's realize there are a lot of people out of work, and there are a lot of parents working very hard to try to pay for their kids' education because they feel that it's not just paramount, it's imperative for their kids to get a college degree. So for those who don't, I think many of these really excellent community colleges, really good community colleges, are performing a tremendous service, and we in the research universities should be extremely appreciative of what they do, and we should work with them. And I know a lot of our universities do work quite closely with them in order to make sure transfer can be done relatively easily, and that we increase the opportunities for such students. So that doesn't answer your whole question, but maybe it's helpful.
Hunter, will you talk about, from your perspective and with the AAU community, the role technology is playing in some way, either revising curriculum or the tools that are being used to educate people?
Yeah, now, just remember, Peter and everyone, that you're asking this question about technology of a professor of Greek. So I don't want to claim special knowledge here. But from what I'm seeing, technology is a growing part of the classroom, and it's a growing part of university strategies. And that's a good thing. This online revolution now is causing all sorts of rapid changes, as you know, and many of those changes, I think, are good. We're in what I would call now the experimental phase of online education. So you have Coursera, you have all these, you have the Harvard MIT effort, edX. Everybody's jumping on this bandwagon, but not to save the ship or to overturn the way we've been teaching students, but instead as an enhancement that, if used intelligently, can be a great thing. One of my favorite uses of it is in many science classes now, where the professor says to the students, look, you're not going to come to class anymore and listen to me lecture. You're going to watch my lecture online in your dorm room or wherever, and when you come to class, we're going to be doing things. You're going to be performing. You're going to be working. You're going to be in groups, et cetera, et cetera. The so-called flipped classroom. Now, the flipped classroom sounds like some big new thing. I mean, Socrates invented this good form of education about 2,500 years ago. So I do find some of this fervor a little misplaced. But it is true that students can take advantage of these things, so can professors. I think more and more science faculty are beginning to make great use of this stuff, and of course that doesn't even touch the way science faculty now use the internet in teaching. It's just fantastic. So we at AAU believe that it's going to be really important to try to make the best advantage you can of that. But on the other hand, I would say it's a little foolish to think at this early date that we're somehow going to reach this great disruption in higher ed that's going to make the classroom obsolete, and everything's going to be done through technologies. So I don't go that far.
Lord Kramer.
You may have heard that in our state, the university system has appointed a committee for strategic planning of the university, and the leaders of that committee have stressed the importance of preparing our students for jobs. And I've been meeting with a group of faculty who are trying to think about how we can convey as faculty to this committee the importance of a liberal arts education. And if you were a faculty member and you had a chance to speak to that committee, what would you say is the key importance of the humanities, the liberal arts, for the total economic and public value that we can bring to the state?
This is a really great question, and I think there's some great answers to your question. Let's start with the simplest one that they'll understand. Most of the kids going to Chapel Hill now are going to have jobs 25 years from now that don't exist today. There is no job. But 25 years from now, there's going to be a totally new job. I mean, if you don't believe me, look at information technology, IT. How long has it been in existence as an industry? 10 years? 15 years, maybe? 25 years ago, there was no such thing as IT. Today, how many hundreds of thousands of Americans are employed in IT? Many, many, many. So the jobs of tomorrow don't exist today, and you'd better be well educated with an ability to think for yourself, to be adaptable and flexible in order to be ready for this constantly, rapidly changing environment. I believe that really strongly. Now, can you argue that the humanities are just crucial for that? I would. That's a harder argument. Somebody has to sit still and listen for 6 minutes to that argument. It's not a sound bite, but I fervently believe it, and I'm sure you do. And so we need to make that case. Not to say that humanities is the only way to do it. I want far more students studying science in this country than are now studying science, because science is just going to be crucial for the future. But if you can't read a Federalist paper, which is 3 pages long, written by James Madison in Latinate prose with some serious argument in it, you're up a creek when it comes to understanding a lot of the public issues that we confront today, because you can't sort out the arguments. You don't have the capacity to be a citizen in this environment. So I think there are a lot of arguments for this, and my business friends, interestingly, are more and more saying, please just give me a liberal arts student. I can train the student. I can get the student going in my job, in the job I've got, but I want somebody who can think and write and speak and not sound like a dunderhead. And unfortunately, a lot of people who aren't very well educated have committed themselves for their lives to second-rate jobs because they can't be effective in a position in today's economy. So I would start with some simple economic arguments that are really hard-hitting and get some quotations from the leaders of leading industries because they are saying it more and more and more now. Give me a liberal arts student. This is contrary to this point of view that I was describing earlier that says, just go out and get a job.
In the back here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm a faculty member in the School of Information and Library Science, and I only say that because the School of Information and Library Science is one of the professional schools on campus, and the professional schools are not really vocational schools, but they're closer to vocational schools than the general college. Sure. So I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about what that relationship between a professional school and a liberal arts institution really should look like.
That's another really good question, and I'll just try my best to give you a brief answer that might be somewhat helpful. I've always had this belief that at a university like Chapel Hill, where you have great tradition in the liberal arts and very strong professional programs as well, that the more the professional programs can take advantage of the liberal arts faculty and base, the better. So instead of being over here by yourselves, you're constantly trying to take advantage of the brain power and the particular expertise of faculty members in whatever disciplines in liberal arts. So the more connected, the better. At Cornell, there's a sort of extreme case in the sense that students in the College of Agriculture take most of their first 2 years in the liberal arts college. So it's just crucial for students in ag to do that. Engineering, same thing. A lot of the best students I taught in Greek history were engineering students. Terrific students, smart as heck. Just because they were smart in math didn't mean they weren't smart in reading complex texts. So to me, the more connections you can make, the better. And that's what separates your being here from your being at another place that doesn't have this superb center.
Okay, James Meeser.
Thanks for being here, Hunter, and thanks for taking this important job at AAU. It's wonderful to have someone who speaks so eloquently about the role of public research flagship universities. A lot of us feel that we are in a very fortunate position in this state, but we also feel very much at risk as we look at a very rapidly changing political environment. Do you have any? Are there any states that are doing this well, that have rallied the business community, the people in the center, the people who really get it, that research universities and public research universities matter? Virginia seems to have done that with their business community. Are there other examples that we could look at?
Yes, there are, and the ones I cite aren't perfect examples, but it strikes me that in spite of a number of difficulties, the state of Michigan has done things pretty darn well in the sense that the University of Michigan has its own board, Michigan State has its own board, they know what they're about. The University of Michigan has a certain independence in terms of its constitutional status. That's a big advantage. That's just an historical artifact in a way, but a good one. And the state of Michigan seems to feel, which I think is enlightened, that it's perfectly appropriate for the University of Michigan to bring in many, many, many students from out of state. So they don't put too tight a lid on out-of-state students. All of that has benefited the University of Michigan, which is one of our great research universities, public research universities in the country. So to me, Michigan's doing a fair number of things right. Now, if you go to Michigan and talk with the people at higher ed, they're going to say, are you kidding? I mean, these last 5 years have been terrible. So I don't want to sound Pollyannish about this. There are problems there just as there are in many other states. But I think they do a pretty fair job. I think for years, Georgia did a pretty darn good job of raising the quality of its public universities. Georgia Tech is the most recent new member of AAU. And I think that speaks really well. I mean, I'm a Southerner, I'm from Virginia, and we don't exactly expect a lot of new members to come out of the South, but Georgia Tech did, and it's gotten really pretty strong. The University of Georgia's made a lot of gains too. I think some of that's at risk now in Georgia, given what's been going on the last couple of years, but at least we can cite that as a place where there's been some real improvement.
Last question, Barbara Hyde.
Thanks, Hunter. Later this afternoon, if the announcement hasn't been made already, we'll be announcing a Chancellor's Search Committee. Many people in this room are serving on that committee, and we're grateful for that. Many of the people in this room also think our best candidate for that job is standing right there. And with... Sorry, Holden, we're not letting up. You are not out of the hot seat, despite what you may think. My question to you is, as we embark on this most important task that any of us can participate in, what advice do you have for us?
Well, like you, I've tried to work on Holden a little bit. We were together in Boston last week, and I thought, maybe I could just stick a little something in there. And the problem was that Holden couldn't get the smile off his face, so I figured I didn't have much of a chance. At least he was smiling more than the last time I'd seen him. So I understand these things. This is a brutally tough job, and the last 2 or 3 years especially have been really tough. And you're, I think, really lucky to have Holden and to have had Holden, because he's got the values of this place in his heart and his brain, and that's what you want from a chancellor. So to just try to make a couple of suggestions. My first point may run contrary to what a lot of people think, but I think you're going to get a really good chancellor. I mean, I'm not the least bit pessimistic about that. This place really has a great reputation. Everybody reads about the problems, but yeah, those are problems. But underneath is a terrific place. And by the way, this comes also as an irony to some people. It's not always terrible to come into a place that's been having some troubles. The hardest thing, in my view, is replacing someone who's been the institution, the icon for the past 20 years. I sort of had that at Cornell, where Frank Rhodes was my predecessor. He was a phenomenal president, absolutely first-rate in every way. And my first 2 years at Cornell, my feeling was, everybody was looking at me saying, who's this guy? And he's no Frank Rhodes. At least the old shoes too big to fill didn't work in my case, but I do think this will be seen as a good job. Obviously, it's a very tough job for you to search, because there's so much due diligence to do. There are so many constituencies. My only advice is, in trying to decide among good candidates, pick the person who really does have your values and understand your values, because that's the most important thing in the end. It may turn out to be a scientist. It may turn out to be a humanist. It may turn out to be a public figure who isn't right now an academic. Doesn't really matter much as long as it's someone with really, really good values who can deal with a complex place and set good priorities. Thank you all very much.